Welcome to another AI pattern recognition deep dive.
We're here again taking this pretty hefty stack of source material, research papers, some intelligence reports, even philosophical texts, and we're going to pull out the essential knowledge you really need.
That's the goal. And today, we're diving into something pretty revolutionary.
Yeah, today we are looking at a technology that doesn't just crunch numbers. It actually sees the world in a new way. We're talking about neuromorphic computing AI, NCAI for short.
Mm-hmm. And this deep dive is, I think, really necessary because NCAI isn't just a minor upgrade. It's changing the whole game, what we even mean by intelligence.
Right, we're not talking about just faster chips here.
No, not at all. This is brain-inspired tech. You can spot these incredibly complex patterns, things happening in your own body, like right down to the cellular level, all the way up to, well, huge societal shifts. It spans all those scales.
Okay, so that's our mission today, to really understand the incredible power of this pattern recognition NCAI has, but also, and this is critical, the serious downsides, the trade-offs, the big existential questions it raises.
Absolutely. It forces us to ask some tough questions.
So let's start with the basics. Usually when we talk AI, we're thinking systems built on that classic von Neumann architecture, right? The standard computer design.
Yeah, the one we've used for decades.
What's the fundamental difference between that kind of sequential processing and this neuromorphic approach?
It's a huge difference structurally, really profound. So the von Neumann architecture, it's all about processing instructions one after another. You fetch data, you execute the command, you store the result. Everything goes through a central processor.
Right, like a bottleneck.
Exactly. It creates this massive bottleneck, especially for energy use and speed when you're dealing with really complex stuff in real time. Because the data and the processing unit are physically separate, you're constantly moving information back and forth, which burns a ton of energy.
Okay, I like the analogy of a single assembly line. It might be efficient at its one task, but it can only do one thing at a time for the whole car.
That's a great way to put it. NCAI completely breaks that model.
Yeah.
It literally mimics the brain structure. It uses these artificial neurons and synapses, and crucially, it puts the memory and the processing right together.
Okay.
And the key architectural feature, the thing that makes it work, is spike-based processing.
Spike-based.
Yeah. Instead of sending those continuous digital signals, the standard ones and A's, NCAI communicates using these asynchronous, precisely timed spikes, little bursts of energy.
Okay, when you say spike, it makes me think of, well, our own brains. The electrical signals between neurons. How does an artificial spike carry information compared to just a 1 or a 0?
That's where the magic happens, really. The efficiency and the complexity. Standard digital signals, they rely on amplitude. Is the signal on or off? High voltage or low voltage?
Right.
Binary. But a neuromorphic spike encodes information differently. It uses timing and frequency. So it's not just if a neuron fires, but when it fires relative to all the other neurons it's connected to and how often it fires. It's what we call an event-driven system.
Event-driven, meaning if there's no event, no relevant spike, then nothing's happening. No energy being used.
Pretty much. If the system isn't detecting relevant changes or patterns, it's essentially idle, conserving energy. And that leads straight into the core characteristics that make NCAI such a potential game changer.
Okay, let's list them out.
Well, first, that energy efficiency is it's mind-blowing. Because they're event-driven, only using power when a spike actually occurs, these systems can use up to 1,000 times less power than the big GPU clusters running conventional AI today.
1,000 times. Wow, that suddenly makes things like, global continuous monitoring seem actually feasible.
Exactly. Scalability becomes realistic. And that energy saving directly enables the second characteristic, massive parallelism.
Right, because traditional systems often struggle doing many things at once.
They really do. Concurrency is hard for von Neumann machines. But NCAI is built for it. It's processing millions, potentially billions, of operations simultaneously across its entire network of artificial neurons, just like the brain.
So it can handle that real-time complexity, like chaotic systems where everything's interconnected and happening now.
Precisely. It's essential for that kind of pattern detection. And there's another crucial difference. Conventional AI, we usually train it to find patterns we already sort of know exist, right? We tell it what to look for.
We define the target.
Yeah, we define the target. NCAI is aiming for something deeper, more exploratory.
Which is?
The ultimate goal is pattern emergence. It's designed not just to connect the dots we give it, but to find totally new patterns, constellations, if you like, that humans haven't programmed in, haven't even thought of, maybe couldn't even conceptualize on their own. It's about finding the inherent order hidden within apparent chaos.
Okay. Discovering patterns we didn't even know were there. That's a big leap.
It really is.
All right, let's dive into the architecture itself. How does it do that? We need to understand these brain-inspired mechanisms that give it this incredible pattern-seeing ability. This goes way beyond standard machine learning.
Right. We need to look at the specific bio-inspired techniques.
Yeah.
And the first one, it's a bit of a mouthful, is spike timing dependent plasticity, STDP.
This TDP.
STDP is essentially the brain's learning rule, or at least a key part of it. And it's fundamental to NCAI. It's what makes those precisely timed spikes meaningful for learning.
How does it work?
Simply put, STDP adjusts the strength of the connection, the synapse, between two neurons based on the very precise timing difference between when they fire.
Okay, so if neuron A fires just a tiny fraction of a second before neuron B consistently.
Then the connection from A to B gets stronger. It reinforces that link. It learns an association based purely on that timing. It's not just that they fire together, it's that one predicts the other.
Ah, okay. It's learning sequence, maybe even causality, from the timing itself.
Exactly. If A firing consistently anticipates B firing, the system learns that predictive relationship. And our sources show this really clearly in predictive healthcare. They describe NCAI systems monitoring lots of biomarkers
Right.
and detecting these patterns of elevated cortisol that consistently showed up 3 to 6 hours before someone reported feeling an anxiety episode.
3 to 6 hours before, not minutes.
Hours. That kind of predictive window changes everything for intervention.
Absolutely.
You know, a conventional AI might spot the correlation eventually, high cortisol, later anxiety. But the STDP-enabled NCAI learns the temporal sequence.
Huh.
This specific cortisol pattern always comes first.
Which allows what?
It allows for genuinely preventive action. Maybe it triggers a reminder for breathing exercises or adjusts medication slightly before the anxiety even becomes a conscious feeling. That's the huge shift from reaction to proaction. That's the power of STDP.
Okay, that covers the sort of microsecond timing, but life unfolds across much bigger timescales too, right? Daily habits, seasonal changes, climate trends over decades. How does NCAI handle that huge range?
That's where the second mechanism comes in, multi-scale temporal processing. Traditional computing often gets stuck because you analyze data within fixed time windows. You run a model for the last 24 hours or the last 5 years.
Yeah, you pick a scale.
You pick a scale.
Yeah.
NCAI, using its spiking architecture, can process patterns across multiple scales simultaneously. It can track something happening in microseconds and relate it to a pattern unfolding over months or years, all within the same system.
So it's like seeing the fractal nature of time almost. Little patterns inside bigger patterns.
That's a really good way to think about it. The climate modeling example in the sources makes this clear.
Yeah, let's hear that one.
Okay, imagine NCAI tracking tiny moment-to-moment air pressure fluctuations, basically, the noise in daily weather. At the same time, it's integrating data on seasonal monsoon shifts. And at the same time, it's incorporating global ocean temperature trends over decades.
All in parallel.
All in parallel.
Okay.
And by holding all these scales together, it might detect a very subtle change in the daily weather pattern noise. That when you see it nested inside the context of the current seasonal pattern and the decade-long ocean warming trend, suddenly signals a major shift in the jet stream is starting, maybe years earlier than traditional models would catch it.
Wow. So it's hearing the first tiny whisper of a huge change because it understands the context across all those timescales?
Precisely. Detecting those microsignals within the macro context. And there's a third key mechanism, sparse distributed representations.
Sparse, meaning not dense.
Exactly. Think about your own brain. When you recall a memory or recognize someone's face, you don't light up your entire brain, right? Only a small, specific set of neurons becomes active. NCAI mimics this. Information is encoded across potentially millions or billions of these artificial neurons, but at any given moment, only a tiny fraction, maybe 2% to 5%, are actually active, actually firing.
Why is that sparsity helpful? Wouldn't having more neurons active mean processing more information?
You'd think so, but sparsity provides incredible robustness and efficiency. Think of it like a huge library representing all possible patterns. To find one specific pattern, you don't turn on every light in the building.
Ah, okay. You just shine a spotlight where you need it.
Exactly. And because the information isn't stored in one central place, but distributed across this vast network, the system becomes incredibly resistant to noise or incomplete data. If some neurons fail or some data is missing, the overall pattern can often still be recognized from the remaining active neurons.
Okay, that makes sense. The education example in the sources really highlighted that robustness, didn't it?
It did. With traditional educational software, if a student skips a bunch of quizzes, say they only complete 30% of the assessments.
The system struggles. Too much missing data.
Right. It can't build a reliable profile. But an NCAI using sparse representations can still figure out the optimal teaching approach for that student. It correlates the few behavioral patterns it did capture, maybe tiny hesitations, specific error types on the completed work, even with most of the data points missing. It fills in the gaps based on the sparse signals it has.
So this whole architecture, STDP, multi-scale processing, sparsity, allows NCAI to get really good at finding complex patterns. The sources list things like chaotic patterns, emergent ones, nested, anticipatory, and inverse patterns. That last one, inverse patterns, seems particularly interesting. What is that exactly?
Yeah, inverse patterns are fascinating. They're about finding significance in what's not there or in behavior that's the opposite of what you'd normally expect. Well, imagine a major, potentially upsetting world event happens. An NCAI analyzing social media might detect an inverse pattern if a specific population shows a complete lack of discussion or emotional reaction. Conventionally, you might interpret that as apathy.
But it could mean something else.
Exactly. The inverse pattern might reveal deep-seated fear, censorship, or a total breakdown of trust in communication channels, which is actually a much stronger signal than loud complaining would be. NCAI is designed to read between the lines, to see the meaning in the silences or the unexpected reactions.
Okay, let's shift from the underlying mechanisms to the actual applications. And let's start where it feels most immediate. Human health. You mentioned continuous monitoring NCAI tracking over 200 biomarkers. This isn't just your step count, is it?
No, definitely not. This is about building a highly detailed, dynamic digital twin of your individual physiology. It establishes your unique baseline across all those markers. Then it looks for tiny deviations long before you'd feel anything or a standard medical test would pick it up.
Let's go back to that viral infection prediction example. It really shows that time sensitivity. Walk us through that sequence again.
Okay, so the NCAI is continuously monitoring this person's data. Days 1 through 4, it picks up a very subtle, gradual 3% drop in heart rate variability, or HRV.
Which index?
HRV is a really sensitive marker of your nervous system's resilience. A small, sustained drop suggests the body's under stress, maybe starting to fight something off quietly.
Okay, what else?
At the same time, roughly days 3 through 5, the system notes a tiny shift in behavior. The person starts going to bed 15 minutes earlier each night than their established baseline.
Not because they felt tired, necessarily.
Probably not consciously.
Yeah.
It's more like the body subtly demanding a bit more recovery time. So you have this physiological stress signal, the HRV drop, and a tiny compensatory behavioral shift, earlier bedtime.
And the final piece.
The final piece was on day 5. There's a clear, more abrupt 12% jump in resting heart rate. That specific combination, the slow HRV decline, the slight sleep shift, then the resting heart rate spike formed a unique pattern.
And the NCAI recognized that pattern.
Yes. It recognized that sequence and predicted an 87% probability of symptomatic viral onset within the next 24 hours.
Which means the person got almost a 48-hour heads up before they'd likely feel sick.
Exactly. Time to maybe isolate, rest, hydrate, maybe take preventative antivirals if available. It's proactive health management based on your unique data signature.
That level of personalization obviously flows right into medicine itself. The sources suggest NCAI could end a lot of the trial and error we see with medications.
That's a huge potential benefit. Right now, medicine often relies on population averages. Drug A works for 60% of people like you. NCAI promises something different. It can integrate your genetic markers, your lifestyle data, maybe microbiome analysis, your specific biomarker patterns.
To predict how you specifically will respond.
Precisely. So instead of your doctor guessing between drug A and drug B for, say, your high blood pressure, the NCAI might analyze your complete profile and predict. For this patient, drug A has an 82% predicted success rate, while drug B only has a 34% chance of being effective. It tailors the treatment from the start.
That's transformative. And what about mental health? The patterns there seem so much messier, more complex.
They are complex, but NCAI seems remarkably adept here too, according to the reports. It looks for combinations of subtle signals that together indicate escalating risk. Things like sustained social withdrawal compared to your baseline.
Right, personalization again.
Yes. Plus, rapid changes in sleep patterns, sharp negative shifts in the sentiment of your written or spoken language across texts, emails, maybe even social media, and specific clusters of search engine queries related to, say, hopelessness or methods of self-harm.
And correlating all of those things together.
By correlating those complex multimodal patterns, the systems described could predict periods of acute crisis, like significantly elevated suicide risk, with reported 94% accuracy, about 7 to 14 days before the crisis peak.
14 days warning, that's an incredible window for intervention. But it also leads to the next area. If NCAI can decode our physical and mental stress so well, what happens when it watches us learn? Not just what we get right or wrong, but how our brain is working.
Well, it probably spells the end of standardized, one-size-fits-all education as we know it.
Yeah.
NCAI can power truly adaptive learning systems. These systems don't just track scores. They analyze the microdynamics of the learning process itself.
Like what specifically?
Things like tiny variations in response times, the specific types of errors you make, second-by-second fluctuations in attention span may be tracked via eye movement, and even indicators of cognitive load or emotional state, perhaps from facial expressions or vocal tone analysis.
Okay, the algebra example in the sources really drove this home. It showed that real-time micro-intervention.
Yeah, it's a great illustration. So a student's working on an algebra problem. They get to the step where they need to isolate the variable x. The NCAI, watching through the interface, instantly detects a 200 millisecond hesitation just before they make their move.
Tiny pause.
Tiny, but significant. Simultaneously, it might register subtle pupil dilation via the webcam, which indicates cognitive strain. They're stuck, confused.
Okay, so it's not just that they're slow, it's recognizing the signature of cognitive struggle.
Exactly. And the NCAI doesn't just note it. It instantly cross-references that specific pattern, the 200 meters hesitation plus pupil dilation right before variable isolation with the student's history. It finds they showed similar microhesitations in 4 previous problems, all related to the distributive property concept.
Ah, so it diagnoses the root cause in real time.
Precisely. It identifies the fundamental conceptual gap, and the adaptive system acts immediately. It doesn't wait for the student to fail the problem. It might gently pause the current exercise and instantly provide a targeted micro-lesson, maybe using visual blocks or a different representation, specifically addressing the distributive property issue that's causing the hesitation. It intervenes before frustration sets in.
Preventing them from hitting that wall. And does this adaptive learning apply over the long term, too?
Absolutely. NCAI can track learning patterns across a student's entire educational journey, K through 12 and beyond. It might identify, for instance, that a particular student learns abstract math concepts best using physical blocks in early grades, then transitions effectively to visual diagrams in middle school, and only really grasps purely symbolic notation well in high school.
So you could tailor the entire curriculum sequence for that individual.
Exactly. A truly personalized learning trajectory based on deep longitudinal pattern analysis of how that specific individual learns best at different developmental stages.
Okay, now let's broaden out again to human behavior patterns in general, social dynamics. You mentioned the importance of the personal baseline here. Why is that so crucial?
It's crucial because it avoids the flaws of judging individuals against crude population averages. Traditional stats might say the average person sends 50 texts a day, but maybe your normal is 10 or 150. NCAI builds your unique behavioral fingerprint first.
What data does it use?
It integrates data from multiple sources, usually passively collected via smartphones or wearables. Things like communication frequency and the sentiment analysis of those communications, location patterns, which apps you use and when, even purchase decisions or content consumption habits. It builds, say, a rolling 6-month average of your normal digital life.
So for something like predicting depression, is looking for deviations from your specific normal, not some generic checklist.
Exactly. And that deviation pattern can be unique to the individual. The sources describe a possible pattern. For one person, maybe weeks 1-2, their social interactions, texts, calls, social media engagement drop 15% below their personal baseline.
Okay.
Then weeks 2-3, their news consumption pattern shifts, maybe concentrating late at night, and the total time spent jumps sharply, say, to 67 minutes a day, way above their norm. Finally, weeks 3-4, their tracked exercise routines drop to only once a week. The NCAI spots that specific sequence of deviations from their baseline as a potential warning sign.
Much earlier and more personalized than waiting for them to meet generic diagnostic criteria.
Much earlier. And this predictive site gets incredibly personal, almost invasive when looking at relationship dynamics, analyzing communication patterns, response times, sentiment shifts, even topic avoidance.
Yeah, that sounds intense, but potentially very revealing.
Extremely revealing. The sources describe a specific predictive pattern for relationship distress. It starts with high-stakes messages like, "We need to talk." If those kinds of messages consistently correlate with response time stretching over 6 hours, and this is combined with a noticeable sustained drop in the use of positive emojis or affectionate language over a 3-week period,
Then what?
NCAI calculates a 78% probability of a significant relationship crisis emerging, one likely requiring intervention or leading to a breakdown.
Wow. So the system is literally reading the health of a relationship from timestamps and the absence of like heart emojis. That's
Right.
quite unsettling.
It is unsettling. It suggests that even our most intimate and complex emotional dynamics can have subtle, measurable predictive patterns embedded within how we communicate digitally.
Patterns we might not even consciously recognize ourselves.
Often, yes. And this ability scales up. From the dyad to the crowd, NCAI analyzes different data streams, economic indicators, social media sentiment shifts, real-time anonymized location data to predict the likelihood and even potential location of protests, reportedly up to 72 hours in advance.
Giving authorities time to prepare or potentially intervene.
Correct. And similarly, it can map how information or misinformation is likely to spread through social networks. It can predict the propagation paths of viral content sometimes 48 hours before it hits peak virality.
Which means whoever controls the NCII could potentially amplify messages they like or try to squash ones they don't before they even take off.
That capability is definitely one of the major concerns.
Okay, let's scale up further. From individual behavior to the massive complex systems, governance, global markets, the planet itself. Starting with political patterns and democracy, NCAI can digest this incredible volume of data. Voter history, economic stats, social media mood, even analyzing candidates' vocal tones or body language effectiveness.
Things no human team could ever synthesize in real time. And this creates predictive power that could fundamentally alter politics. The swing state prediction example is a really clear case of how different patterns converge.
Right. Walk us through the key factors that came together in that prediction. What did the NCAI identify?
The sources describe a specific scenario. The NCAI flags a district where economic anxiety, measured by a specific index, climbs above 67, particularly in areas reliant on manufacturing. That's factor 1, high economic stress.
Okay.
Factor 2, simultaneously, social media analysis shows conversations shifting sharply away from policy debates towards personal attacks on the candidates, a negativity indicator.
And the third piece?
Factor 3, polling for a third-party candidate reaches 4.7%. The historical data embedded in the NCAI identifies this specific percentage as a critical threshold where that third party starts significantly splitting the vote, enough to change the outcome.
So the combination of economic pain, rising online negativity, and that specific level of third-party support.
Based on that precise confluence of patterns, the NCAI predicts a 71% probability that District X will flip parties in the upcoming election.
That level of predictive accuracy gives campaigns, or anyone with access, unprecedented power to target resources, messaging, maybe even suppression efforts.
Absolutely. But perhaps even more powerful than election prediction is policy simulation. NCAI allows us to model the cascading long-term effects of major policy decisions across entire societies, like the Universal Basic Income UBI simulation mentioned.
Right. Normally, you'd expect analysts to predict, increased consumer spending, maybe some inflation. What unexpected emergent patterns did the NCAI simulation uncover?
It found some fascinating second and third order effects. While there might be some short-term shifts in the labor market, the NCAI predicted significant unexpected benefits elsewhere. For example, a 14% improvement in healthcare access, specifically in rural areas.
How? Not by building new clinics, surely.
No. The simulation showed it was because people in those areas suddenly had enough disposable income to afford gas or car repairs or bus fare to actually get to the doctors and clinics that already existed but were previously inaccessible due to simple poverty and distance.
So the UBI acted like a key unlocking access to existing infrastructure.
Exactly. Economic stability enabled mobility, which improved health outcomes. And there was a similar effect in education.
What happened there?
The NCAI simulation predicted an 11% increase in overall education enrollment developing in years 2 through 5 after the UBI started. Financial pressures eased, allowing more adults to go back for training, or enabling younger students to stay in school longer instead of dropping out to work. A single economic lever pulled produced complex, positive ripples in health and education years down the line.
That's powerful predictive simulation. And NCI is also being used as an oversight tool, detecting potential corruption.
Yes, by correlating patterns that are often hidden in plain sight, but too complex to track manually. It compares officials' voting records against stated constituent preferences, against timelines of political donations, and sometimes against unusual changes in personal wealth indicators.
And when do the alarm bells ring?
The source data indicated NCAI flags a high probability of corruption, like 89% probability, when it sees a pattern like this. An official consistently votes in line with the interests of a specific donor group on, say, 94% of relevant issues, immediately following a cycle of significant donations from that group, especially when those votes directly contradict the known preferences of, say, 67% of their own constituents.
It's spotting the statistical shadow of a potential quid pro quo.
Essentially, yes. Patterns that strongly suggest influence is being bought, even without direct proof of bribery.
Okay, let's pivot to economic patterns. Markets, trade, and the big one, inequality. Predicting commodity prices, like coffee, is famously difficult. How does NCAI handle that kind of chaos?
By integrating seemingly unrelated data streams across different scales and locations in parallel. For the coffee price prediction, the NCAI wasn't just looking at futures markets. It was correlating satellite imagery that estimated inventory levels in warehouses globally.
Wow.
With real-time weather data showing drought conditions in a key growing region, Region A. Simultaneously, it factored in reports of political instability affecting harvests in another major producer, Region B. Then it added subtle currency exchange rate fluctuations, and it detected a consumer trend shift, a 23% increase in online searches and purchases related to cold brew coffee makers.
So it connected the weather in Colombia, politics in Vietnam, currency markets, satellite photos of stockpiles, and shifting consumer tastes in, say, California, all into one predictive model.
Exactly. It synthesized all that chaotic multi-source data, and the resulting prediction was remarkably specific. Coffee prices were likely to increase by 34% within the next 90 to 120 days.
Anyone with access to that prediction has a massive market advantage.
A huge advantage. It allows for optimized purchasing, hedging, and resource allocation. It highlights how this technology could dramatically concentrate financial power.
Which leads directly to perhaps the most sobering economic pattern NCAI has uncovered, structural inequality.
Yes. This is a stark finding reported in the sources. NCAI analysis, correlating vast data sets, found that a person's ZIP code at birth is predictive of their lifetime earnings potential with 71% accuracy.
71%, just based on where you were born.
Yes. It's a devastatingly clear statistical measure of how deeply embedded inequality is. The NCAI correlated factors like historical redlining policies, current school funding levels per district, local crime rates, which it found had an extremely high correlation, R-squared of 0.83, with local poverty rates, the prevalence of food deserts, and even the average commuting distance to available job opportunities. It essentially mapped the geography of disadvantage.
And realizing that changes how we think about solutions, right? The simulation showed that isolated interventions aren't enough.
Precisely. The policy simulations were critical here. They showed that if you only focus on, say, increasing education funding in disadvantaged areas, you might only improve intergenerational economic mobility by about 8% over 25 years. A positive effect, but small.
But if you tackle the system,
But if you implement a coordinated package of interventions, simultaneously education funding, plus affordable housing initiatives, plus accessible job training programs, plus progressive tax policies, and universal access to health care, this simulated improvement in mobility jumped dramatically to 67% over the same 25-year period.
it proves these problems are interconnected. You need a systemic solution for a systemic problem.
Exactly. NCAI makes that interconnectedness visible and quantifiable.
And finally, let's look at planetary systems. Climate. Resources. NCAI's strength in handling multi-scale time data seems tailor-made for climate modeling.
It really is. It can integrate ocean current dynamics, melting ice sheet data, atmosphere CO2 concentrations, deforestation rates, industrial output, human energy consumption patterns, all simultaneously. This provides a much more holistic picture.
So beyond better weather forecasts.
Well, the local weather forecasting is good, 94% accuracy according to the sources. But the real power is understanding the whole Earth system. NCAI is providing 5-year forecasts for global temperature anomalies with reported 73% accuracy.
Which allows for better long-term planning, but also leads to predicting potential catastrophes, tipping points.
Unfortunately, yes. Based on current emissions trends fed into the models, NCAI calculates the probability of the Amazon rainforest reaching a tipping point and undergoing irreversible collapse at 34% by the year 2075.
And it doesn't just predict the tipping point, but the consequences, the cascades.
Yes, that's crucial. It models the cascading effect patterns. For instance, the models predict that significant melting of the Greenland ice sheet will likely disrupt major Atlantic Ocean currents.
The AMOs.
Right, which in the model leads to significant cooling in parts of Europe, which then triggers widespread agricultural failures, leading to food price spikes globally, which historically correlates very strongly with social unrest and increased international conflict. NCAI maps out that entire chain reaction decades in advance.
Seeing the dominoes lined up before the first one falls?
A chillingly accurate description.
Oh.
And it does the same for resource depletion.
What are the predictions there?
Based on current consumption rates, population growth, and environmental degradation patterns, the NCAI models predict 47% of the world's major aquifers could be critically depleted by 2060. It also forecasts the potential onset of a global copper shortage starting around 2048 and a major topsoil degradation crisis leading to about a 30% loss in agricultural productivity hitting worldwide by 2073.
These aren't just warnings. They are timelines based on current patterns.
Yes. They represent the statistically likely future if the currently observed patterns continue unchecked. They define the window we have left for massive systemic change.
Okay, we've laid out the truly staggering power of NCAI, predicting personal health, mapping relationships, forecasting market crashes, and even planetary tipping points. But this level of predictive power obviously comes with enormous risks. Let's tackle those head-on, starting with maybe the most immediate danger, algorithmic bias amplification.
This is a huge concern and really insidious because NCAI's predictions feel so data-driven, so objective. But they're built on historical data, and history is full of human bias.
So the AI doesn't just learn the patterns, it learns the prejudice embedded in the patterns.
Exactly. It learns our historical biases, sexism, racism, classism, because they are present in the data we feed it, and then it automates and scales up that bias, often invisibly.
The criminal justice example from the sources is a perfect illustration of this dangerous feedback loop, sometimes called algorithmic oppression.
It really is. Here's how it works. Historical arrest data, which we know is influenced by biased policing practices, shows higher reported crime rates in certain minority neighborhoods. The NCAI learns this pattern from the data. Then, the NCAI predicts future crime risk will be higher in those same neighborhoods. Based on that prediction, police resources get allocated disproportionately to those areas. More police presence leads to more arrests for minor infractions in those neighborhoods.
Which generates new data.
New data showing higher arrest rates, which gets fed back into the NCAI. The system then becomes even more confident in its biased prediction. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, reinforcing historical inequality through seemingly objective algorithms.
The system literally trains itself to perpetuate the bias without any human explicitly coding be biased against this group.
Precisely. The bias emerges from the data patterns, and we see the same risk in employment.
The resume example was chilling.
Yeah, and NCAI trained on decades of hiring data from a company with historical, maybe unconscious biases might learn that resumes mentioning, say, the African American Student Association statistically correlate with fewer callbacks or hires in the past data.
Even if the company is now actively trying to increase diversity.
Even then, the AI, optimizing for predicting successful hires based on past data, might subtly downgrade candidates with that affiliation, perpetuating the very discrimination the company is trying to overcome. The bias gets laundered through the algorithm.
Okay, beyond bias, if NCAI can predict markets, elections, resource availability with such accuracy, this inevitably leads to a massive concentration of wealth and power, right?
It seems almost unavoidable without strong regulation. It creates a new, extreme form of information asymmetry. The few entities, maybe huge corporations, maybe certain governments that develop and control the most powerful foundational NCAI models will have predictive insights simply unavailable to anyone else.
Giving them a near insurmountable advantage.
Absolutely. They can optimize financial investments, political strategies, resource acquisition, lobbying efforts, market timing, to a degree that makes current inequalities look minor. It's like playing poker when you can see everyone else's cards.
The sources drew a parallel to the printing press, which concentrated information power for centuries. Is NCAI analogous, just faster and more pervasive?
It feels like that, yes. The printing press controlled the dissemination of knowledge. NCAI controls the prediction of the future based on all available knowledge. If you can accurately predict market movements and policy impacts, you effectively eliminate risk and uncertainty for yourself while everyone else is still operating in the dark. That's an enormous concentration of power.
This leads us into deeper philosophical territory, the potential erosion of free will and meaning. If NCAI can map our patterns so perfectly, does our sense of agency, our free will, even survive?
It's the age-old determinism versus free will debate, but supercharged by technology. Let's say you're facing a big life choice. Quit your job, option A, or stay, option B. NCAI analyzes everything: your past behavior, your communications, your finances, your stress biomarkers, and predicts you will choose option A with 94% accuracy.
So what does that do to my feeling of making a choice?
Right. You might still feel like you're choosing freely. You could even defiantly choose option B just to prove the machine wrong. But the NCAI might have factored in your personality profile and predicted that rebellious reaction too.
So the choice itself becomes just another predictable data point in the pattern.
That's the unsettling possibility. Perfect pattern recognition might force us to confront the idea that humans are fundamentally highly complex deterministic systems. We react to inputs based on our conditioning and biology in predictable ways, even if the calculation is too complex for us to see ourselves. This challenges core beliefs about autonomy, responsibility, merit, foundational ideas for our societies.
And tied to this is the optimization trap. We build NCAI to make things better, more efficient, healthier, safer. But optimization requires defining goals using metrics. And metrics can't capture everything we value.
Exactly. Optimization needs targets. We can measure GDP, test scores, crime rates, hospital readmissions. NCAI can be brilliant at optimizing systems to improve those numbers. But what about things like empathy, creativity, wisdom, beauty, ethical reasoning, the sense of community?
Things that are hard, maybe impossible to quantify.
Right. And because they're hard to measure, they tend to get ignored or even actively designed out of systems being optimized for quantifiable metrics. They become externalities.
So if you optimize education purely for test scores and job placement rates,
Then courses in art history, philosophy, or literature start to look inefficient. They don't directly boost the target metrics, so the optimization pressure gradually eliminates them. You risk creating generations of people who are incredibly technically skilled, but perhaps lack cultural depth, ethical grounding, or the ability to question the system itself.
and this leads to the ultimate concern. If life becomes predictable, optimized, a kind of solved game, what happens to human meaning?
So much of what we consider meaningful comes from struggle, from uncertainty, from striving towards goals we aren't guaranteed to reach. Growth comes from overcoming challenges. If NCAI smooths out all the bumps, optimizes away difficulty, predicts every outcome, does that core human drive just wither?
If there's no real uncertainty, no real risk, no possibility of failure, why strive? Why create?
It's a profound question. Does meaning evaporate in a world without genuine surprise or the need for resilience?
We also have to grapple with the trustworthiness challenge. Even if NCAI is powerful, can we always trust its output?
Not blindly. We need to understand its limitations. Reliability varies wildly. For relatively simple, constrained systems like managing traffic flow or optimizing a factory assembly line, NCAI can be incredibly reliable, 85% to 95% accuracy perhaps.
But for more complex, open systems,
For chaotic systems like predicting individual human choices in novel situations, forecasting social movements, or predicting the outbreak of wars, the accuracy can plummet, maybe down to 40% to 60%, or even worse. We have to be honest about where it works well and where it's basically guessing, even if it sounds confident.
and there's the fundamental issue of correlation versus causation. NCAI is brilliant at finding correlations.
But it doesn't necessarily understand the underlying causal mechanism. The classic simple example. NCAI might perfectly correlate rising ice cream sales with increased drowning deaths. The correlation is real in the data.
Because both go up in the summer.
Exactly. But the cause is the third factor. Hot weather. The NCAI itself doesn't inherently know that. If you trusted it blindly and wanted to reduce drownings, you might foolishly try to ban ice cream. It highlights the need for human oversight to interpret the correlations and understand the real-world causal structure.
And finally, there's the black box problem. These systems are so complex.
They're incredibly complex, especially deep learning-based neuromorphic systems. They're nonlinear, with millions or billions of interacting parameters. Often, even the engineers who built the system can't fully explain why it arrived at a specific prediction or decision.
So how do we trust systems we can't fully understand?
That's the core trustworthiness challenge. How do you build democratic accountability and public trust around systems making critical decisions in healthcare, justice, finance, defense, when the reasoning behind those decisions is fundamentally opaque. Even to experts, it's a massive hurdle.
Okay, it sounds terrifying. We've built this incredibly powerful tool that could amplify bias, concentrate power, erode free will, and make decisions we don't understand. So why? Why are we building NCAI at all? What's the human paradox here?
The paradox, according to the sources, is rooted in our own limitations as humans. We are amazing creators, innovators, but we're often terrible at long-term systemic thinking. We suffer from cognitive biases.
Like,
A key one is temporal discounting bias. We consistently undervalue future consequences compared to immediate gratification. We know smoking is bad long-term, but the immediate pleasure wins out. We know climate change is a huge future threat, but immediate economic concerns often take precedence.
and we just can't process the sheer complexity of global systems in our heads.
Our biological brains didn't evolve for that. We struggle to grasp the interconnectedness of global finance, climate systems, supply chains, and social dynamics all at once. So we have these recurring patterns of behavior, environmental damage, boom and bust cycles, escalating conflicts, partly because we literally can't see the long-term systemic consequences of our actions clearly enough or early enough.
We keep making the same large-scale mistakes.
Pretty much. So NCAI, in this view, isn't just a tool. It's potentially a necessary cognitive prosthesis. It's designed to overcome our inherent limitations. Its purpose is to make those invisible, complex, long-term patterns visible.
Like germ theory made microbes visible, allowing us to fight disease.
Exactly. You can't effectively fight patterns you can't see.
Right.
NCAI could potentially extend our collective awareness, our pattern recognition ability beyond our biological limits, allowing us to finally address these huge systemic challenges we keep failing on.
So the argument is, essentially, the alternative is worse. Continuing on our current path, guided only by our flawed human cognition, is statistically more dangerous than the risks of developing and trying to safely manage NCAI.
That seems to be the core rationale presented. The projections based on current trends, climate catastrophe, resource wars, extreme inequality leading to instability, pandemics are dire. NCAI, despite its risks, offers at least the possibility of navigating these threats more effectively. It gives us an early warning system and a way to simulate potential solutions before we actually hit the wall. It's a gamble, but maybe a necessary one.
Okay, if we accept that gamble, given the immense power and the clear risks, what principles do we absolutely need to put in place to manage this technology responsibly? How do we build trust and maintain control?
This needs to be baked in from the start, not bolted on later. The sources emphasize several key principles. First, transparent limitations. NCAI predictions must never be presented as absolute certainties or objective truths. The system must always report its confidence level for any prediction. We predict X with 71% confidence. And crucially, it must also report its known failure modes, or the types of situations where its predictions are unreliable. No more black boxes pretending to be crystal balls.
Okay, honesty about uncertainty. What's next?
Second, and this addresses the correlation-causation issue and the black box problem. Human in the loop for critical decisions.
So the AI doesn't get the final say in important areas.
Exactly. For high-stakes decisions, making a medical diagnosis, recommending a prison sentence, hiring or firing someone, deploying military force, the NCAI should provide analysis and recommendations, but the final judgment must remain with a responsible human being. The human is there to catch potential errors, consider ethical nuances, weigh non-quantifiable factors, and take ultimate responsibility. The AI informs, it doesn't command.
That seems crucial. What's the third principle?
Third is contestability. If an AI system significantly affects someone's life, denies them a loan, flags them for surveillance, gives them a low performance rating, that person has a right to know that an AI was involved.
And
they have the right to understand the reasoning behind the decision, at least to the extent technically possible, even if it's complex. Most importantly, they must have a clear process to challenge the AI's decision and get a meaningful human review. No automated decisions without recourse.
okay, transparency, human oversight, the right to appeal. What about the power concentration problem?
That leads to the fourth principle, which might be the hardest, distributed control. We absolutely must avoid a situation where one single company or one government or small group of entities controls the critical NCAI systems that monitor global resources, financial markets, or essential infrastructure.
How do you achieve that?
The governance structures for these powerful systems need to be inherently distributed, perhaps federated, involving multiple stakeholders. They need to be democratic, transparent, and publicly accountable. We need mechanisms to prevent these systems from being used solely to optimize for the narrow interests of their controllers.
That's a tall order politically and technically.
It's incredibly difficult but essential if we want to avoid creating an unbridgeable gap between the NCAI haves and have-nots.
So, despite all these necessary controls and the risks, there are genuinely positive applications envisioned, right? And they seem to create new roles for humans working with the AI. Let's talk about the personal health pattern interpreter.
Right. This is a new kind of health coach or guide. Imagine your personal wearable device running a local NCAI has learned your specific baseline over months. It sends you an alert. Detected energy levels 23% below expected range for the past 48 hours, despite adequate sleep duration according to your tracker. This pattern sometimes precedes viral infection onset in your profile.
Okay, that's useful info, but maybe confusing. What now?
That's where the human interpreter comes in. You talk to them. They help you understand the alert in the context of your life. Maybe you just ran a marathon, or you have allergies acting up. They help you decide the right response. Take it easy today. Monitor symptoms closely. Get a COVID test. Consult a doctor. They mediate between the complex AI prediction and your real life.
Got it. And a similar idea for social situations, the pattern-based mediator.
Yes. Think of a persistent conflict in a workplace team. A traditional mediator might focus on communication styles. An NCAI could analyze anonymized communication patterns, meeting dynamics, calendar data, maybe even stress indicators if available ethically.
And find a deeper pattern.
It might reveal, for example, that the core issue for employee A isn't really about wanting to work remotely all the time, but specifically about avoiding the stress and lost time of their particular 2-hour commute. While the manager's core need isn't butts and seats, but ensuring opportunities for spontaneous, informal collaboration that happens in person.
It finds the underlying needs, not just the surface arguments.
Exactly. It might find the inverse pattern, the real needs hidden behind the stated positions. And based on that pattern analysis, the NCAI could suggest a systemic solution that satisfies both needs, maybe a hybrid schedule, but also company support for relocating the office to a location more central to where most employees actually live, reducing commute stress for everyone.
A solution that addresses the root cause identified by the pattern. The human mediator then helps implement that.
Precisely. The human builds trust and facilitates the change identified by the AI.
And finally, the example of NCAI optimizing city services, leading to tangible benefits like saving lives.
Yeah, a citywide NCAI could optimize complex systems constantly, adjusting traffic light timings every 30 seconds based on real-time traffic flow to reduce congestion and emissions, predicting likely water main breaks 72 hours in advance based on sensor data and usage patterns, allowing preventative maintenance.
And the emergency vehicle example.
That was compelling. By constantly analyzing crime patterns, traffic flow, event schedules, and demographic data, the NCAI predicts where emergencies, fires, medical calls, accidents are most likely to occur in the next 15-30 minutes. Based on these rolling predictions, it constantly suggests optimal repositioning for ambulances and fire trucks every 15 minutes or so.
Moving them closer to where they're statistically likely to be needed next.
Exactly. Reducing average response times across the city. The sources estimated that this dynamic predictive repositioning alone could save something like 12,247 lives annually in a city of 2 million people, just by shaving critical seconds and minutes off emergency response. That's a concrete, life-saving optimization enabled by seeing the patterns.
Wrapping this up, NCAI clearly represents this profound leap in our ability to see and predict patterns. We've gone from, trying to guess if it will rain to potentially predicting the exact onset of a virus in our own bodies or mapping the complex indicators of societal collapse decades out.
It's like humanity is trying to build an extension of its own consciousness, one capable of understanding systems far too complex for any individual brain or even groups of brains to fully grasp.
But as we've discussed, this power forces us to confront that core truth. We often can't change the patterns we can't see. NCAI gives us the potential sight to finally intervene effectively in huge problems like climate change or systemic inequality.
But the cost or the risk is immense. The potential amplification of bias, the concentration of power, and maybe most profoundly, the possible erosion of our sense of autonomy and meaning if we allow ourselves to become just data points in an optimized, predictable system.
Which brings us back to the human element. The challenge seems to be holding on to the idea that meaning doesn't just come from predictable success, but from the striving itself, from creativity, from grappling with the unknown. Even if an AI can predict the likely outcome, we have to find ways to value the process, not just the optimized result.
And that leads us to one final, really provocative thought raised by the sources. NCAI is getting incredibly good at analyzing culture itself, decades of literature, music, visual art. He can identify the deep structural patterns, the recurring themes, the cycles of influence and reaction.
Like spotting the 20 to 25-year nostalgia cycle in pop music, or seeing how new artistic movements often emerge by combining elements from previously unconnected styles, what the sources called adjacency patterns.
Exactly. So here's the question. If an NCAI analyzes all existing cultural output and predicts, maybe with 80% accuracy, the key features, the aesthetic, the themes, maybe even the narrative structure of the next big thing, the novel or the musical genre that will resonate most powerfully 5 years from now because it sees the fertile, unexplored combinations of patterns.
If it can predict the next masterpiece before it's even created.
Does that act of creation still belong entirely to the individual artist, to their unique struggle and insight? Or does part of it belong to the underlying pattern itself, the pattern that the NCAI merely revealed? What does that do to our understanding of creativity and artistic ownership in the future?
That's definitely something to chew on. If the pattern pre-exists, the artist who stumbles upon it, who is the real creator?
The artist.
Or the system that saw the map? A question for another deep dive, perhaps.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
We'll see you soon.
This is DigitView.